Welcome to this Level Up Skill Series video on the quadratic formula. In this video we're going to take you through a couple of examples of how to use the quadratic formula to solve quadratics, and also look at how this could be adapted to more difficult contexts and also where this could be used in further applications. So the first thing to look at is what is the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is a formula used to solve quadratic equations. Now when we mean solve, we mean find the values of x. Now our formula is there on the screen. It's x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now the question is, well, what does all of that mean? Well, first of all, if we look at our formula, we have an a here at the bottom. It's used to solve quadratics in the form ax squared, and that a just relates to that value. So that coefficient of x squared is essentially your a value. You can then see it's bx, so our coefficient of b, now importantly it's the sign as well, that's going to go in there, and then finally c is our answer there, and that will go in there. So c is the constant value. So a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant value of the number on its own. Now you'll notice that this says it can be used to solve quadratics in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, and that's really important. If you get a quadratic that's not equal to 0, you'll need to rearrange it so that it's equal to 0, and then you'll be able to solve it by identifying the correct values of a, b, and c. Now not all quadratics can be solved, so some of them will not have solutions, and we'll talk about what those solutions represent, and then it might make some sense why we can't solve them all. But usually in an exam situation, if you're asked to solve one, it will be solved. So let's look at our first example here. The first thing we want to do is identify what is a, what is b, and what is c. Now remember, a is the coefficient of x squared, so this is our a value, so a is equal to 2. I'm just going to make note of it there on the side. Looking at b, again bring the sign in with us, b is positive 8, so b is equal to 8. We don't need the plus if it's a positive number. And then finally c is 3. And we're happy because our quadratic is equal to 0, we know that can work. Now, using our quadratic formula, we had minus b, and every time we substitute a value, we're going to put it into brackets. So I'm just going to write the structure and then we'll fill in our numbers afterwards. So it's minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Now let's sub in our values. So we had minus b, so this was a b here, and then b squared minus 4ac, so that's ac all over 2a. So you'll notice here in our formula I've replaced all of the b's with 8, all of the a's with 2, and all of the c's with 3. Again, remembering our formula is x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I've just substituted into that formula which we saw in the last a moment ago. And now we can just take our calculator. If we've got the right calculator, this makes it much easier. So in our calculator, we're going to just substitute this in. Now there's an important feature here that we've not mentioned yet, and it can cause some confusion, and it's what does this plus or minus mean? Well, what this means is you're going to do the calculation twice. You're going to put it into your calculator once with a plus there and once with a minus, and you'll end up with two different answers for these questions, and I'll explain why we have two different answers in a moment. But if you put it in, you put minus 8 minus the square root, so we use a minus where that highlighted plus or minus is, and we use a minus value, we will end up with an answer of x equals negative 3.581, etc. And it continues on after that. And if you do it again with a plus, you end up with a value of x equals minus 0.418, etc. And that continues on. Now this question asks for our answer to one decimal place. So therefore our answers are x equals negative 3.6 and x equals negative 0.4. Now the question is, why do we get two answers? What do they represent? Well, a quadratic is a graph, and its shape is like this. So it's a U shape. What these values tell us, these are called the roots or the solutions. So these are our roots, which is where it crosses the x-axis. So if we draw our quadratic axis, and we draw our quadratic, which will look something like this, the key thing that we know is that this value here will be your minus 3.6, because that's one of your values. This value here would be minus 0.4, and again we're just sketching here. And interestingly, this value here you can also work out because it's always going to be this constant value. So that's 3. So you can sketch these quadratics and highlight those 3 key points. So our solutions, or our roots, are the 2 values across the x-axis, and then that c value is always going to be a y-intercept. But again, the purpose of this video is to look at how to find those roots using the quadratic formula. So let's look at the second example. Again, we're going to start by identifying the values of a, b, and c. So a is going to be 5. B in this case, remember, we're bringing the sign with us. B is equal to -7. And then C, again, bringing the sign with us. C is -11. So C equals -11. And then we can substitute that into our formula. Okay, so again, we've got minus B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And we just need to figure out what values go in each of those. So again, our B is -7, so it's minus B plus or minus the square root of B squared, 4AC, so A is 5, and 5, and then C is -11. And there are values subbed in. Again, going back to that quadratic formula. Now the important thing to notice here, and this is where you need to be very careful, notice that my minus, I've brought the minus with that 7, so I've got -7 at the very start, and I've got -7 squared, or -7 squared. Make sure that squared is outside of the bracket in that -7 squared part, because otherwise you will get the incorrect answer. And also make sure you include your brackets, because actually on your calculator, if you write -7 squared on your calculator, it's likely to give you an answer of -49. And that's because when your calculator does this, it reads it as 0 minus 7 squared. So using BIDMAS, it does 7 squared, which is 49. 0 take away 49 is -49. You have to tell your calculator that you want it to square the whole thing. So you put brackets around it, which will then give you the correct answer of +49. So that's the importance about getting the brackets right. Again, we then put that into our calculator twice, once with the plus, once with a minus, because of this plus or minus. So if we do this with a plus and a minus, if we do it with a minus, we get x equals -0.94. And then if we do with a positive, we get x equals +2.34, etc. Then it asks again for 1 decimal place. So if we round to 1 decimal place, x equals -0.9 and x equals +2.3. And I recommend that you write to more than 1 decimal place initially and then round your value afterwards and put that little ellipses. You don't need to worry about rounding those first values, just write the first 2 or 3 decimal places and put an ellipses. In both of those cases, the next value is 0 anyway, but we just want to make sure that we're writing the original value and then we're rounding it correctly. And again, our solution is at our -0.9 and x equals 2.3. And once again, what that means as a graph is we're going to draw it like this. Again, on this side it would be -0.9. On this side it would be 2.3. Again, the axis is probably not in the middle, so our axis should probably be moved over a little bit like this. And then this point of intersection here, where it crosses over, is -11. So again, we've got all those key points marked. Now it's your turn to try. So pause the video now, take a couple of minutes to try this question, and then come back and check your answers. Okay, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to try this and get your working out and see how you get on. Again, we don't need a sketch, we're just worrying about what the values of x are. So once again, we're going to figure out the values of a, b, and c. So in this case, a is 3, b is 10, c is -4. So again, if you don't get the same answer as me at the end, check to make sure you get the same values of a, b, and c as me. If you didn't and you've noticed a mistake, again, pause the video now, correct your answer and see if you can go from there. Substituting into our formula then, x equals -10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4ac all over 2a, so 2 times 3. And again, getting our two solutions, we get x equals -3.69 and x equals +0.36. So our final answers then, again to 1 decimal place, are x equals -3.7 and x equals positive 0.4. If you try drawing the sketch and you want to know what that would look like, again, your sketch should look something like this. You've got your quadratic. This value here would be 0.4. This value here would be minus 3.7. And this value here where it crosses over is negative 4. So again, I hope you got that one correct. And again, if you didn't, take a moment, try it again. And there's a lot of online calculators. If you ever want to try more of these, you can just practice them. And if you stick it into any AI or into an online calculator, it should be able to give the answer for you. Now, I mentioned earlier that not all quadratics can be solved. And this is an example of one that can't. Again, if we try and do this like we would normally, we'd have a equals 3, b equals 1, and c equals 1. Again, subbing that into our formula, we get minus 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1 all over 2 times 3. Now the question is, well, why does that not work? We've got the values that subs into our formula. If you put that into your calculator with the plus or the minus, it'll usually give you a math error. Now, what a math error occurs in one of two situations usually on your calculator, in terms of GCSE Maths anyway. A math error will occur if you try and divide by 0, which we're not doing here, we're dividing by 6, or you try and find the square root of a negative number, because the square root of negative numbers don't exist, because if you square any number, it gives you a positive. If we go one step further with this question, and we say, well, actually, what would the next step be without using a calculator? That's negative 1 plus or minus the square root. And then in this case, we've got 1 squared, which is 1. And then negative 4 times 1 times 1 is negative 4 over 6. And then that gives us minus 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 over 6. And here's your problem. So because that's a negative 3, that's why you get a math error. And again, this usually wouldn't happen in the case of GCSE Maths, but in A level, we start looking at things called the discriminant, which is working out that bit under the square root to check whether it's solvable or not. Now, why does this happen? Why would you have a quadratic that appears like this? Well, very simply, like I said before, the solutions to a quadratic is where it crosses the x-axis. If it's got no solutions, very simply, that just means, well, it must then not cross the x-axis. So you might have a graph that looks something like this. We know it crosses the y-axis at 1, but it doesn't cross the x-axis at all. So therefore, there are no solutions. So it's not that the question is broken or doesn't work. It's that actually the answer we're looking for doesn't exist because our graph doesn't cross the axis. Now, one final example, just to do a little bit deeper thinking on this. We've got this question, which again, there's no x squared, so it doesn't look like a quadratic. But let's start working this out. If we expand our brackets first, we end up with 6x squared minus 10x is equal to 4x plus 6. So now we've got an x squared, we've got two x terms, and we've got a 6. So we've got a quadratic. The problem here is that actually what we have to remember very, very early on, we said quadratics can only be solved if they're equal to 0. So we have to rearrange this so that it's equal to 0. So this 4x is going to move to the other side of the equal sign and become negative, and this 6 is going to do the same thing and become negative. So when you rearrange this, you get 6x squared, subtract 14x, subtract 6 equals 0. Now you have a quadratic in the form 6x squared minus 14x minus 6 equals 0. So because it's equal to 0, we can then solve that. So take a moment on your own to try and solve this, and then when you've done that, press start again, and I'll show you the answers you should have got. So hopefully you had a chance to try this, and if you did and you used the formula like we had before, the answers you should have got are x equals 0.6 when rounded to one decimal place, and x equals 1.8. Now further applications of this include things like algebraic fractions, which you can see on the left, solving those. When you solve that and make it into an equation, what you'll find is that will give you a quadratic equation, which will then need to be solved in order to find the value of x. Or on the right hand side, we've got nonlinear simultaneous equations. Sometimes it'll be a circle and a straight line like that one there. Sometimes it might be trying to find the point of intersection between a straight line and a quadratic. But you'll end up with a quadratic, and then you'll find your values for x. And in that case, it's important to know you'll get two values of x. You'll then sub both of those in to find two different values of y. Again, we're not going to go through those questions, but that's just where this goes one step further. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope that you found it useful. There are other videos and other topics covered on the channel, so please feel free to click through those and hopefully see you in another video.